folks. Welcome back to the Field and Garden Podcast. And if this is your first time, well, welcome aboard, folks. My name is Lisa Mason Ziegler, and I am your host. And this podcast is brought to you by the Gardener's Workshop. You know, the Gardener's Workshop started, almost 2 decades ago, right? And has grown into so much more than we would have ever imagined. It began as a small urban flower farm and has just flourished into so much more. We are now a online learning center. We have an online garden shop that only sells those tool, seeds, and supplies that I actually use on my farm. Those things that I find to be just the tool for the job, my favorite seeds, and then all the learning tools that you need to actually do it. We have free resources as well as paid online courses to really take you from A to Z, whether you're a gardener or a flower farmer. So welcome to the Field and Garden Podcast. Today, I want to talk about a subject that I get asked about actually really kind of quite often. And most often, it is from new or fairly new flower farmers as well as gardeners. And I get the comments so often that says, it kind of goes like this. I'll get an email. It'll say, we know that you plant mostly annuals, but I'm going to actually plant mostly perennials in my garden or on my farm because I don't want to have to replant every year. And, you know, I kind of chuckle to myself and think, oh my goodness, what you're not realizing yet, that is that in fact, perennials may seem like a less labor-intensive crop, than annual plants, but in fact, they come with quite a bit of maintenance if you want them to continue to thrive, things that people don't think about. As in a landscape or in a home garden, perennials, have to be kept weed-free year-round. And that, in my environment, I'm in the South. I'm in southeastern Virginia. So that means we have a long growing season, as well as we have quite a few of pretty heavy perennial weed pressures, like Bermuda grass and nutsedge and those types of things. And you have to stay on top of the weeding of perennials, just like a landscape, year round, or it easily gets out of control, or worse yet, you make it a once a year job so your landscape looks kind of tough. There's nothing attractive about it as it gets eaten up with weeds. And that's like your spring annual job that you actually, in fact, dread all year. Because you do it in spring, it looks beautiful, and by midsummer, your landscape is a mess again, and then it gets so out of control so fast, you just kind of write it off, right? So perennials do take work, and here's the other thing. Many or most of them, with the exception of the one that comes to mind, peonies don't fall into this, but most perennials need to be lifted and split to rejuvenate them, to keep them producing year after year after year. Many people do it every 3 years. That seems to be a really great system. But I'm not talking to you here today about perennials. I'm just saying that there is a side to perennials that most folks don't really think about, and they jump in and make a big investment and then learn about some of these steps. So for me, on my little farm, and even before I was a farmer, I was primarily an annual grower. And it really, for my reasoning behind that at that point in time, was that the perennial weeds were just more than I could actually keep up with and deal with, because that becomes a real handwork job. Because I do not use herbicides, it's it's just a job that can't be handled in any other way. If you don't use herbicides, then it becomes a monitoring, hand pulling job. And that was just something that it just never became a part of my day-to-day life. And that led me down the path of planting so many annuals, which, yes, the annual beds grow just as many weeds. However, because I had a small tiller back then, it allowed me, if I didn't keep up, and those annual plants could be pulled out, that area could be easily worked either with a tiller or it could be tarped to extinguish. So there was a lot of other options. So what I want to talk about today is kind of what I have found, why I have been, I really expanded my gardening, which then led to a flower farm. And I did that based on annuals. So I'm not discouraging people from growing perennials. I'm just saying it is not as easy as you think it is. And these are my reasonings behind that. First off, what is an annual? And what is a perennial? Maybe I should say that. A perennial is a herbaceous plant, meaning that typically it dies all the way back to the ground and looks like it's gone during winter, and then it regrows the next year. Okay, that's a perennial. So that's a plant that comes back every year from either the roots or tubers or whatever are growing in the ground. Annuals, on the other hand, their life cycle typically is for 1 year. And for my discussion purposes, I refer to annuals as there's two types of annuals that I talk about, teach about, and actually grow. The first group of annuals are what I call warm season tender annuals. They are the most popular beyond a shadow of a doubt, y'all. Those are plants like zinnias, sunflowers, basil, and tomatoes. It's those plants that we plant in early. We are waiting for the earliest bit of warmth to get that stuff out in the ground to grow all summer, because they thrive in warm, hot conditions, and we just absolutely adore them. So that's group one, and that's the most common, that whenever you say the word annual, that's what people instantly think of, or that is that group that I just spoke of, the warm season stuff like tomatoes, basil, zinnias, and those types of heat lovers. But there's a second group of annuals that people kind of really fell out of, well, we call it retail fashion, several decades ago. And this group of flowers is known as cool season hardy annuals. And there are, in fact, vegetables, herbs, and flowers that fall into both of these categories. Okay? So the cool season hardy annuals just so happens by a huge opportunity, and I did not know it when it happened 2.5 decades ago, is when I went to launch my flower farming career. It was actually at the end of summer, and I happened upon a tidbit about this group of annuals called cool season hardy annuals, and that they could oftentimes in many winter hardiness zones be fall planted to be some of the first bloomers in spring. And you probably, if you're a follower of mine, you know where I'm going with this, and that group of flowers is what led to my book called Cool Flowers. But I launched my flower farming career on this group of flowers, and they became a really big part of my operation out of the gate, which is why I kind of came to write that book. So there are two types of annuals that I'm speaking of. There's warm season and there's cool season. And I really like to just kind of talk about that early on, because so many people just don't get that there's stuff other than warm season to plant. Literally, for many of us, there are annuals to be planted year round. You can almost find anything to plant for whatever season that you're in. So those are the two different types. Now, to the big question, why do I plant annuals, right? I mean, what's the big draw here for me? What drew me in and what keeps me growing annuals? So I'm just going to go down this little bullet list that I kind of have been thinking about for a few days and made up. And this is applicable whether you are a home gardener or a farmer. These bits and pieces can actually be rolled into whatever you're doing, right? So for me, the number one thing that I realized is that I could get the biggest bang of blooms per square foot with annuals over perennials by a long shot. And as a home gardener, I mean, that's what I'm looking for, right? Is how to have spots of color in my landscape or in my vegetable garden or whatever your home garden is all about. But as a flower farmer, I'm looking for the very most production per square foot for as long a period as I possibly can. And annuals fill that bill. And once you really wrap your head around that, if you succession plant, it doesn't matter what size space you have, a 10-foot bed or 1,000 square feet of garden or an acre of garden, you can apply the succession planting concept to your actual group. And my book, Vegetables Love Flowers, which is really about a 3-season cutting garden, y'all, really helps you with that. That's what that book is really all about. It's about how flowers benefit a vegetable patch. Then that's a very short piece of the book. The rest of the book is really about how to provide that constant source of flowers to get these beneficial creatures into our vegetable patches. And you do that with a 3-season annual garden, right? And, you know, you can do it. Here's the other part of this. Here's the second thing that for me, one of the most common, especially when Suzanne and I were still traveling around and I was doing lots of speaking engagements, whether it was at like a garden show or for conferences of whether it was gardeners or farmers, master gardener groups, I would often hear from people after I spoke, oh my gosh, I just don't have any room left in my garden. They have filled up their entire property with, we all want to have woodies and some perennials, but you've got to designate a fairly good portion of your garden to annuals, or you run into this problem. People would say, oh my gosh, I would love to grow some of those things that I saw in your show today, your slideshow, but I have no room left. Friends, that's the gift of annuals. I never run out of space. And when I remember this and say, okay, I've got this home landscape or I'm going to build a flower farm. First off, if you're a starting flower farmer, I totally recommend you 100% start with all annuals. Y'all, you have to figure out what the heck you're doing and how to do it before you start investing money in things that you're not even sure you need yet. And are those what you are actually going to end up needing for the market you go into? Because you may think you know that at the beginning of your career, but I cannot tell you how quickly that can all change. So, for the home gardeners, I guess is who I'm really speaking to, is, leaving pockets in your home landscape that is designated to annuals, that you do not go out and bring home stuff and take up that space. Because you can have, because I'm going to get to here in just a couple minutes why I love annuals so very much. These are kind of like the support system of why I like annuals. But you're going to get to why. I mean, y'all, if you're a home gardener, you've got to leave some holes for annuals, whether it's holes or a designated spot. And then once you bring yourself to do that, then you have to embrace succession planting. So here is another reason that I totally adore growing annuals. Every time I get those, I'm shopping online, I'm finding new seed varieties that I want to try. I always have a way to get those into my garden. I don't run out of space because let's just say that, I'm a home gardener and I have an area that I have designated. I have a cool season annual spot and I have a warm season annual spot. Just because you find a new seed today does not mean you have to start it tomorrow. You can just paper clip it to your calendar so that when it's time to start seeds for your next succession of that family, meaning cool season or warm season, it's right there ready and waiting for you. Y'all, there are so many ways to have so much more fun gardening doing this. So much more fun. You don't have to rip out some permanent planting because you came across some absolutely breathtaking snapdragons, or you now want to grow sweet peas, or these new queen zinnias. There's room for you to have new stuff every year, to enjoy the established stuff, the perennials and woodies you have. There's always room for more types of flowers. So here is why, the real reason that I absolutely adore annuals. Y'all, it allows me to continually embrace my love of gardening. It's the cycle of gardening that I love. And if you talk to most gardeners, and really drill down on them, it's like they love, why do you think, and I'm not calling you out, men, but I am kind of on this. Why do you think men are so famous for starting like 200 tomato seeds when all they really need is like 5 tomato plants? It's because they love being a part of that amazing miracle of seed starting. Planting a seed, watching it sprout, then tending it, and while you're growing it inside and giving it what it needs until you get it out in your garden, and then you plant it, and then you support it. This is what we love about gardening. Annuals allows you to embrace this over and over and over again. It is this cycle. I love shopping for seeds. We should definitely have seed support groups. People that once you embrace learning how to start seeds, which I just love teaching seed starting, particularly with soil blocking, it just changes the lives of so many people because it's an easier, more tabletop home environment. And if you're not a home gardener, but you're a flower farmer and you're like me, where I still don't have any greenhouses or hoop houses, I do all of my seed starting inside of a 10 by 10 room. It could be a spare bedroom in somebody's home. When we were in high production, we started over 100,000 seedlings a year using that system and embracing succession planting, meaning we could start seeds 12 months out of the year, but we don't in December because I take December off from seed starting. I was thinking about that this morning as I was walking in with the dog. He and I were out playing ball, and I was walking in the house to come do this podcast recording, and I thought, how nice that I don't have to pop into the grow room this morning to actually water and tend to plants and do all those things because I take December off. But back to this whole cycle. We're constantly starting seeds, and you just wouldn't do it on nearly the volume that we do, right? I love shopping for seeds. I love talking to my flower farming friends about new varieties that they've tried. It takes y'all about 5 to 10 years from the time that a seed comes on the market until it starts trickling down that we all start finding out about it. It has to be trialed amongst growers. That's one of the great things of being a member of the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers. You can become a trialer of cut flowers, seeds. If you're a good record keeper. I don't do it because I'm a crummy record keeper, y'all. That's the truth. So shopping seeds is part of what I love, and being an annual grower allows me to constantly embrace that. And here's the other thing. I adore seed starting. I mean, my life was changed when I came upon soil blocking, which is the English and Dutch method of seed starting. It is super space savvy because, now I have at least a work building to put a room in to do it. But the first 5 years of my flower farming life, I live in a bungalow, y'all. I started seeds on my kitchen counter and used my pantry and our cellar for grow lights until I got a bigger space outside. But I was starting thousands of seeds in my home and was able to do it, and fell in love with soil blocking and the whole miracle of sprouting seeds. And I don't want to give that up. That's what helps to keep me as an annual seed starter. And then I love tending to seeds. I mean, let me tell you, walking out now, the setup I have in my 10 by 10 room with racks and grow lights, I often compare it to, I've heard family members who, I have dairy farmers that were in my family as well as friends, and I've often heard them talk about that there was nothing like being in the presence of cows in a barn, whether they were feeding them or if they were milking them, and just that was a really, just great feeling time for them. That's how I feel about being in my grow room with all those little seedlings, whether I'm watering and tending them and moving them around from the heat mat to the grow light, and just being in the presence of seedlings restores my soul, y'all. And that is not something I am willing to give up. And so that is just a really big part of my life, particularly these months we're getting ready to head into January, February, and March. While, we're all so desperate for gardening, right? It's been cold outside most often, snow, all that stuff. The seed starting time for me during that period is really, really special. And I don't want to give that up. And then comes the next fun part. For me, I also, because soil is such a big focus for us, all throughout the year, we're tending to our soil, meaning nourishing it with compost, protecting it with mulches and cover crops and those types of things. But when it's time to start planting all of these little babies, oh my goodness, I love that. And I'll tell you, each one of these steps, as I'm just talking to them about it to you, I'm just reminded of how sweet this time is for me. I tell you another really time that I feel like I can't believe that we get to do this job, that I get to do this over and over again. After all of our, for instance, at the end of the cool season planting time, or at the end, there's really no end, but after we've planted many beds of transplants for a season, I just love standing and looking at all those little rows of plants. And I think about, holy cow, we started them from seeds. And now look at them. And then as they start to grow up and we net the beds, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just, I love, y'all, the whole cycle of gardening. And by growing annuals, it just continually reminds me of what a wonderful process it is. And that includes, so then of course we move in to what are we doing with these annuals, whether it's vegetables or herbs or flowers. You're harvesting from them or you're tending them if they're in your landscape. You're going to be deadheading them to keep the blooms really coming. And if they're vegetables, you're going to be harvesting from them. And all this fuels the fire that keeps them going, right? And you're doing the things for them that they need to continue to grow, whether that's feeding them, supporting them in whatever way, whether it's flower support netting or whatever support system for whatever it is. But one thing I want everybody to understand, what a lot of people never embrace is how to succession plant, because they are so weary of pulling out plants. Every plant has a life cycle. And that's even true for trees, y'all. Did you know that a landscape, when it is planted, like if you put a new landscape around your home, the average age of a landscape, that I understand, is 10 to 15 years. That means that after 10 to 15 years, many plants begin to outgrow their space, and they need some either serious editing or replacement. And that's part of life. I'm not talking about cutting down every tree on your property. I'm talking about you have to do some editing. Sometimes trees are planted too close together, but in the beginning, you do that because they're so small and it takes them so long to grow. Oftentimes, half of the trees that are planted in a landscape are planted with the intention that they're going to be removed in 10 to 15 years to allow the others to flourish and fill out. Does that make sense? Annuals are no different. And that's why succession planting is so significant. And it really teaches you how to have a better appreciation of the life cycle of an annual. And that means that because you have more stuff planted, because you're embracing succession, what you realize is you eliminate those crops or plantings that are kind of on their way downhill. Meaning they aren't blooming quite as much. Maybe a little disease has crept in. Maybe there's a pest issue. But what you start to understand is it's okay to pull stuff out because you have more coming on. And once you really just embrace that, you can actually just love gardening even more. And for me, the most exciting part is that I know that with each season, with each passing year, I can grow more different stuff, different colors. That's one of the funnest things for me about succession planting. So, we plant warm season tender annuals several times during the summer. You may not do that in a home landscape, but as a flower farmer, we do that to up our harvest. But what can happen is it's like if you forget to start a certain color or you find another variety, you just plug it into the next succession. Y'all, this is an exciting part of gardening and farming that a lot of people never embrace because they can't control their overzealousness, which I totally get, by planting every square foot you have the first time for like all at once, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So friends, annuals are the gold in gardening, if you ask me. And there are so much, and when you succession plant, that also stretches out the work, the seed starting. It allows you to make seed starting a part of your gardening life, not this thing that you do a whole bunch of at one time and it takes over your space and annoys you and your family because you really don't have space for it. Or as a flower farmer, you can never have enough lights. Well, you don't do it all at once, y'all. So that's kind of why I plant annuals. And I hope that kind of sparks, maybe some new ideas and new opportunities. Is a great time of year to be thinking about it. We start seed starting in January and February, but guess what, y'all? We're not starting that warm season tender annual stuff. It's not nearly the time to do that. But there are definitely cool season Hearty annuals that can fit the bill for you. So if you want to learn more about succession planting and growing annuals in this way, my book, Vegetables Love Flowers, is really about a 3-season cutting garden. First off, I share why you would want to have flowers in a vegetable patch. It's essential. And then also my 10 go to warm season, my 10 go to cool season, a little bit on seed starting, how to plan and plant your cutting garden, succession planting, some harvesting information, and then the book wraps up with the way that I grow my garden without any pesticides, organic or otherwise, y'all. It's kind of how we do it here at the Gardener's Workshop. So check it out. You can find it on my website, thegardenersworkshop.com, or booksellers anywhere should have it or be able to get it for you. My book, Cool Flowers, is a deep dive on those cool season flowers. If you want to learn more about that. And friends, the Gardener's Workshop has lots of resources. I invite you to check it out. But also, folks, if you are enjoying my podcast, it helps me so much, and I read every single one of them. If you post a review, that helps the podcast apps show my podcast to more browsers. Those are people outside of my circles, right? So please like and share. If you post me on social media, this podcast, please share it with your friends. That really helps me so much. And that's what helps us to just create more and more content. So friends, until we meet again, ciao.